Today we are living with two national and international crises. Climate change was first officially recognised as a serious issue by the world scientists 30 years ago in 1990, but it was not until 2019 that countries throughout the world declared it a national and international emergency. 2019 was the year a new coronavirus named COVID-19 infected the human race, and that too is regarded as both a national and international emergency, recognised as a pandemic. Both crises are to do with the air we breathe. COVID-19 is typically transmitted through someone with the virus coughing or sneezing, and another person breathing it in and catching it that way. Climate change is to do with the atmosphere that we live and breathe. The outcome for both is human suffering and death, which is what we are trying to avoid in both cases. Now, COVID-19 is accidentally and unknowingly transmitted, whereas pollution is knowingly caused. The vast majority of sane, intelligent people know that driving cars and excessive industrial emissions are causing an overheating of the world's atmosphere. Now, some climate change deniers continue to plead ignorance despite 30 years of sound scientific evidence, but now that the world's population is speaking out for climate justice, that can no longer be claimed as an excuse. Let's go back to 2016 and the Paris Agreement of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was attended by government officials from across the globe, and who agreed to lower greenhouse gas emissions to just 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level. Now, following this agreement, the International Panel on Climate Change produced a special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees in October 2018. Now, this special report states that maintaining a temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius remains possible, but only through rapid, and I quote, rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy, land, urban and infrastructure and industrial systems. Meeting the Paris target of 1.5 degrees Celsius is possible, but would require, I quote, deep emissions reductions, rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society, unquote. In order to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, CO2 emissions must decline by 45% relative to 2010 levels by 2030, in just 10 years' time, and they must reach net zero by around 2050. Let's now return to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lessons we can learn. What lessons can we learn from this pandemic that we are currently living through? Now, I've just mentioned meeting the Paris 2016 targets requires major changes in all aspects of society, and we've proved that this is possible. Changes in society. Number one, many of us now spend most of our lives in our homes, no longer going out to work, to study, or to worship. Our children no longer go to school. We are no longer allowed to meet socially with our family and friends, or to organise any gatherings of people at all. Even a trip to the local shops is a very different experience, with having to queue to get in, due to the limit to the number of customers allowed in at any one time, and then having to face empty shelves for common items. Number two, we have proved that citizens will listen to the government when major lifestyle changes are seen as important. Number three, we have reduced our greenhouse gases by driving less and flying less. Number four, we have consumed less because we've been shopping less. Many shops and other businesses have closed altogether. Home delivery is becoming the norm, so we now have a single delivery vehicle to replace the hundreds of cars visiting a shopping mall, representing a huge reduction in greenhouse gases. Instead of business people flying and driving to meet each other in person, we now meet online. And number 6, we have shown that we as a species have the ability to adapt and change, just as we always have, for our continued survival. We're working on surviving COVID-19. We need to continue to work to survive the climate change we've caused. We've recognized that our health is more important than profit margins. In just a few short weeks, our governments have made radical changes to society, putting people first above the global economy. We've been faced with our mortality and our dependence on nature, because we are part of nature. Climate behavioural psychologist Paul Hoggett, a professor of social policy at the University of West England, calls COVID-19 a trial run for the global climate pandemic which will soon be upon us. I quote, "People have been forced to shut down and self-isolate, experiencing a whole range of norms of lifestyle that they never imagined." Hoggett predicts that if the COVID-19 crisis deepens, shortages felt now will be similar to those felt in 2050 and 2060, when the worst effects of climate change will be felt. Reduced consumption and mobility will also have mental health effects, Hoggett believes. COVID-19, like climate change, will disproportionately affect the poor, who are unable to bulk buy and who have less access to spaces for recreational respite. Nations such as the United States and Brazil, which have downplayed the threat of COVID-19, have approached the virus in the same way they approach climate change, according to Hoggett. The steps they have taken first involve denying it exists, then admitting it exists but claiming that it's not important, then stating that it does exist and is important, but that the economy should take precedence. It's a classic denier's response, Hoggett adds, of the nationalistic reaction to a planetary problem requiring global consensus for resolution. There will be political criticism too, Hoggett believes. This idea that governments are powerless in face of economic realities to tackle the climate crisis will no longer suffice. The citizens of the world have shown to our governments that we are willing to respond to directives from them when they are made with the good health and well-being of the citizens in mind. Now, the measures to counteract climate change are in some ways greater than those to counteract the spread of COVID-19, but in other ways they are not as strict. To counteract climate change, we won't need to stay at home like we do now. Our children will be able to go to school, and we will be able to go to work and study, but how we travel to these places will need to be changed. At the moment, we don't travel at all. But we will be able to travel, just not by petrol or gasoline car. We will be able to interact socially again. However, we will need to better insulate our homes, change to other forms of transport, even on the occasions when we do travel. We will need to cycle, to walk, or use public transport instead of drive. Just as we've done for the COVID-19 crisis, we need to get used to new ways of living and working to adapt to the climate change crisis. We will need to shop locally, that is, buy locally produced food to reduce transport costs. we will need to farm more sustainably, which means growing our own crops and buying local crops and locally farmed fish and meat. Due to COVID-19, we've made personal sacrifices for the better good of society, out of love for others, to avoid sickness and death. We've shown that we can voluntarily make these sacrifices in our lives because we know it is the right thing to do. Deep down, we are all good, and we know it is right to choose the good. With COVID-19, scientists have shown us what it is and how it is transmitted. We now have to adapt to mitigate its transmission until they find a vaccine. With climate change, scientists have also described it to us, its causes and its effects. But for this, there is no vaccine. We ourselves, our lifestyles and our personal decisions to change, working hand in hand with government policies for the good of society, these are the only solution.